Honestly, Dune Part 2 is incredible, and I can't stop talking about this movie. But there is one topic that, for some reason, continues to come up in all my mentions and all my comments, and they're asking about the popcorn bucket. What does this thing even look like? Let me search and Google this and see. And oh my gosh. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and today we're getting into all of my spoiler-free thoughts on Dune Part 2, which is, by the time of you viewing this review, in theaters right now. I recommend you guys see this on the biggest screen possible because I can't stop talking about how amazing this film is. There's so much from the top to the very bottom of my list of why this movie is not only just a masterpiece, but guys, yeah, it's probably the greatest sequel since Empire Strikes Back. Now, if you don't know much about Dune Part 2, it follows directly after the events of Dune Part 1. House Atreides has fallen. Only Paul and Lady Jessica remain, and now it's up to them to extract revenge against the Emperor who has sent them there to die. And if I say anything else, it's spoiling stuff, because I went into this only seeing the very first official trailer, and that's it. And I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I didn't get spoiled, because there are so many shocking moments, including a twist at the end of this film, that had my jaw on the ground. Now, before we get into my review, if it's your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies, TV, and all the news in between. So if you do too, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and like this video. But before we get into it, I want to know, y'all, which performance was your favorite in Dune Part 2? I think I got one. Alrighty, y'all, so let's get started. The film is directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it's written by Denis Villeneuve and Jon Spaihts. The cinematography is by Greg Fraser, who also did work on Part 1, and the music is by Hans Zimmer, the legend himself, who also wrote the score for Part 1. The film's cast is stacked. It's starring Timothe Chalamet, I almost said Timothée Chalamet, who plays Paul Atreides, Zendaya, who plays Chani, you have Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Lady Jessica, Javier Bardem, who plays Stilgar, Austin Butler, who plays Feyd-Rautha, and not Elvis in this movie, surprisingly, and Florence Pugh, who plays Princess Irulan. But y'all, alright, we do gotta get started with at least the negatives, right? Because like I told y'all, and like you've seen on social, I'm over the moon with this movie, but let's get into my negatives. Okay, let's get into my positives, because guys, I got no negatives for this movie. If I even had to extract one area of improvement, it's more time to develop the character of Princess Irulan, but I think they're doing something similar with her role that they did with Zendaya's role as Chani in Part 1. Sorry, I got Avatar on the brain. They're basically planting seeds and letting us know in Dune Messiah, the third and final installment in Denis Villeneuve's trilogy, that we're basically going to get a lot more of Florence Pugh in that role. So I'm not mad at it. So guys, let's get into the positives, because trust me, this movie is excellent. It's excellent. It's an A+. And I don't even want to wait till the end. It's a 5 out of 5. But why is it a 5 out of 5? Well, I got some positives for you. So let's dive into them. Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya's duo in this movie really drives the film forwards, and it's actually the strongest pairing in the film, both of them delivering breathtaking performances from start to finish. Now, to me, this is Timothée Chalamet's strongest performance to date. It's his best role. I've never seen him act like this. I honestly do think this will be his career best. He's powerful. He commands your attention, especially in the scene where he's addressing the different leaders of the Fremen in that council setting. It was incredible. I couldn't tell you I remember even taking a breath, and I didn't blink. I didn't want to miss a second of what he was delivering on screen. It was palpable. And Timothée Chalamet, for me, has been someone who I definitely wasn't always on board with as an actor until I saw Dune Part 1, and I thought, wow, that moment with him and Rebecca Ferguson in the tent after House Atreides fell was incredible. And then you get all of that times 10 in Part 2. He's confident. He's honestly going to probably give us another great performance in Dune Messiah, so if this is his career best, what's he gonna do with Part 3? And then there's Zendaya, who plays Chani, who is the love interest for Paul Atreides, and I'm gonna be honest, even though her most complex role yet in her career is as Rue in Euphoria, in Part 2, I believe she delivers the most emotionally layered performance of the film and maybe of her career. She has this delicate balance where she is both very powerful, she's a leader, and she definitely steals scenes, but then there's a tenderness to the character of Chani, and she actually portrays that perfectly in my opinion, because you can see how her character bounces in and out of those different sides of her personality, and I loved it. Zendaya, to me, is one of the best performers in Hollywood right now. She's very versatile. I loved her in all of the Spider-Man Tom Holland films so far, and here in Dune Part 2, I was hoping we'd get even more of her, and we did. And it was well executed, and her alone, great. Her with Timothe Chalamet, like, your mind is about to be blown, because they do an amazing job together, and honestly, nominate her for an Oscar right now. Do it. And we'll get back to the acting, I promise, but now I want to dive into some of the technical elements that make this movie, in my opinion, a 5 out of 5. So it starts with Denis Villeneuve, who is, wow, how do you put it into words? It's absolutely perfect directing. He's someone who has an amazing filmography anyway, but Dune Part 2 might just solidify him on that Mount Rushmore of directors. I don't know, guys, because Dune Part 2, like I mentioned earlier, it's the best sci-fi sequel since Empire Strikes Back. Nothing compares. Absolutely nothing. You do find sequels sometimes being great, but not as great as their predecessor. And here with Dune Part 2, it just improves in every single category. For as political as Part 1 is, Part 2 is just as action-packed and then some. The scale is larger, the stakes are even higher, and the emotion bleeds off of the screen. Also, guys, I felt almost every emotion as a viewer. Happiness, humor, sadness. I was disturbed by Feyd-Rautha. I mean, House Harkonnen. And then you have a tension that is felt in your bones in this movie. I couldn't tell you enough. When you see this movie, see it in Dolby or see it in IMAX, because a standard screen, fine, but it won't deliver the impact that I believe you need to, of course, experience when you first watch Dune Part 2. Denis also knows how to pace a movie, and if you were not very happy with the pacing of Part 1, trust me, Part 2's pace is crisp, and it never feels like its runtime, which is 2 hours and 46 minutes. I had a coworker go to one of the promo screenings down here in South Florida, and I told him of the runtime, and he's like, oh, almost 3 hours? And then, the next morning, amazing. I didn't care. See, that's exactly why this movie is so good, because you'd be hard-pressed to sell, in this day and age, a movie at a near 3-hour runtime. Oppenheimer was a rarity, and now you can add Dune Part 2 to that list as well. I also love how Denis Villeneuve honors fans who have either rewatched Part 1 several times, I'm raising my hand, or recently rewatched it before Part 2, which I also did, because there are so many subtle callbacks and connect-the-dot moments, especially in Part 2's third act. Just pay attention to the way Paul is fighting, and I hope you will let me know in the comments if you kind of understand why this moment kind of is a callback to the first film, in a certain training scene that we got with him and Gurney Halleck. So I'm curious. Let me know what you guys think about that. Simply put, you guys, Denis Villeneuve crafted a masterpiece, and it left me itching for his final installment in the trilogy with Dune Messiah. But guys, there's also a nice tale of two halves in this movie, in the best way possible. In the first half, it's very much Paul getting indoctrinated into the Fremen lifestyle. He's becoming Fremen, and I loved it. There was a methodical pace to it, but it was interesting around every corner, and I actually wouldn't have minded if we got more, but I understand the departure in the second half, which is more so Paul now starting to, well, he's still struggling with the prophecy of him being the Lisab al-Gaib, but he's diving more into it. We get all the action, House Harkonnen gets introduced, and the great houses. So it's really cool. We start to see a lot of different moving pieces, and it becomes a little bit more political in the second half as well. I will say that final stretch it felt like I was on a roller coaster ride. I was so intrigued and so into it, and I loved it. I really loved what they did in the first half, and I especially love what they did in the second half. And continuing on this technical note, the cinematography and score in this movie is not only captivating, but it's pulse pounding. Like I mentioned earlier, Greg Fraser is the cinematographer here, and he's in the Hall of Fame of DPs if there ever was one, right alongside Roger Deakins. I really put him up there right now. What he did with Dune Part 1 and what he did with the Batman, it's sold me on his talent. Now what he's done in Dune Part 2, he's gotten better. I didn't even think it was possible, but his cinematography here, the way he lights and blocks scenes, it's unreal. And I do think he tells a story through the cinematography as well. Now, did it help that they shot on location? Absolutely. However, it's up to Greg Fraser to really frame a lot of those shots and get the most out of each scene. The colors were beautiful. I just really felt more immersed in the film, due in large part to the cinematography. And when it comes to the score by Hans Zimmer, I mean, what else is there to say about this man? He's a legend, and his score for part 1, it's an all-timer. And for part 2, oh my gosh. Now, I know I need to rewatch this movie a few more times, just like I did with Dune Part 1, but I listened to the soundtrack off screen when I was out of the theater, and it's so invigorating. It's excellent. There's a lot of weird, in the best way possible, instrumentation going on and timing, and it sounds cool. You know, it really does fit the vibe of Dune Part 2, and a big part of why I love Part 1 is the music. So, again, it's excellent here, and Hans Zimmer he's really in his bag, y'all. He does such a good job. All right. I'll get back to the acting now. We got to talk about some of the supporting cast because they were aces, y'all. And we're going to begin with Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica, aka the Reverend Mother. She delivers a scary good performance. I felt that her performance in part 1, she was able to really convey a lot of subtleties, but here it's way more on the nose in a good way. She's able to freak out the crowd by some of the way she speaks, her mannerisms. I don't know. For me, Rebecca Ferguson is one of those takeaways where people are going to be talking about Timothe Chalamet and Zendaya. But Rebecca Ferguson, man, the way she's able to capture your attention, she does so in a way that's unique from everyone else around her. And then there's Javier Bardem as Stilgar. Now, I loved him in part 1, but again, we didn't get much of him. Here in part 2, we got a lot of Javier Bardem, y'all. He's so bound up by the prophecy of the Lisab al-Gaib, and wow, there's a certain theme they play to here. I believe it's fundamentalism, and it's crazy how he's always convincing others. And then eventually, it gets to a point where he's a zealot and he's not necessarily a leader anymore, and I like that shift for his character because it makes sense to me. And I also think he's the most hilarious actor in the film. His comedic timing is really good. Another standout was Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. He is, I would say, the main antagonist in the second half of the movie. The minute he gets introduced, you can tell he's menacing, sinister, and he gets lost in this role. Like, if you didn't tell me this is Austin Butler, I would never probably know. He is so good. You're probably wondering what's up with his accent. At times, it is a little hard to understand him, but it gets better when you get used to hearing the way he speaks. Yes, okay. He's got like a thing with accents lately. I get it, that whole Elvis voice, but you don't hear that here. So I really did like what Austin Butler did with the role, and man, there's a moment in this gladiator setting where you see like this bright whites and some of these dark blacks, and cinematography, right? Amazing. Lighting, and to the entire cast and crew did an amazing job. And then Austin Butler's like the cherry on top, the very bald cherry on top. And then there's Florence Pugh, and I know I mentioned her earlier, but again, she doesn't get much screen time. I thought she did an alright job though. I can just tell she's about to bring it in Dune Messiah. I know she will. Again, a little bit muted compared to the rest of her co-stars. However, I think that's what the script called for, so no fault to her. Now, there are two surprises among the entire cast that I hope people talk more about, honestly. Christopher Walken as the Emperor, and, forgive me if I mispronounce her name, Suhela Yaqub as Chani's friend Shishkali. And my goodness, we have Shishkali as Chani's friend, who's hilarious, always kind of taking digs at Paul Atreides, but she eventually comes around to support her friend, and I love that, you know? Like, there's a cool arc for her character there. And I hope we get more of her, I really do. She's really, really good here, and she does complement Zendaya really well. And then Christopher Walken. This is the best performance of his that I've seen in a long time. There are some shows I know he's been a part of that I haven't watched yet, but Christopher Walken as the Emperor, when's the last time you saw him give a performance this good on the big screen? And he hardly has screen time, so that's how notable it is. Now, I could go on and on and on about Dune Part 2, but I think I'm going to leave y'all with this. The film is a masterpiece. It is a spectacle to be witnessed in a theater and rewatched several times. I can't rave enough about this movie, from the warm writing that took my breath away to the gladiator scene and even that finale. There's a lot here to love. And like I mentioned, there's a twist that just, I didn't know what to do with myself. I looked over to my friend, I'm like, are you for real? It was such a fun time in the theater, and I can't wait to see it again, you guys, because it is a movie that it lends itself to a rewatch, because there are elements I know I've already missed. I mean, I'm still picking up new things with Dune Part 1, and I've watched that movie 4 times. So Dune Part 2, yeah, it's rising on my list of all-time favorite films, and it really is right alongside Empire Strikes Back as the greatest sci-fi sequel since. And wow, I loved it, man. So yeah, 5 out of 5, 100%, 110%. Tell me though down below your rating for Dune Part 2, because I want to know, guys. And hey, if you enjoyed this review, subscribe to the channel for more movie reviews throughout the year, more coverage of TV and film. I cannot wait to talk more about Dune. Who knows when we'll get Dune Messiah, right? But after this opening weekend, I can imagine it's going to make a lot of money. So, Denis, you might want to get on the phone with Warner's and start talking about what you might want in Dune Messiah, because it's coming faster than you think, man. Alrighty, y'all. Well, this was fun. I love talking about Dune Part 2. And again, thanks so much for watching. And I'll catch you at the next screening. No, I'm never going to buy that popcorn bucket.